You also comment in your report on Austin Sigg's school performance.
Yes, I don't remember which page that was.
And if that is important to you, I can certainly find it for you. I do not have it marked on my notes. Let me do that. Page 4.
Okay.
Now, school performance or lack of school performance may be something that as a psychologist you would consider potentially as mitigation.
I'm not sure in what sense.
Well, certainly, let's talk about a little bit of what you testified earlier to. You testified about adolescent brain development, right?
Yes.
You testified about your opinions as to whether or not Austin Sigg, at least for the information that you had access to, was acting as the result or in part as the result of an immature brain.
Well, I was talking about typical adolescent immaturity, not specific pathology in adolescence, but I was talking about the MacArthur study and developmental immaturity in general in adolescence.
So one of the things that as a psychologist you will look at may be grades, performance in school, indicators, especially for teens and children, because really that's the only sort of access they have is school and performance in school. I mean, that's what their life is sort of based on at that point, right?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean. It doesn't tell you much in the sense that many kids who are smart are just not motivated in school. So the question is kind of general. But often grades don't tell you a whole lot about the kid because they could be just simply not motivated and do poorly for that reason.
Okay. Well, you indicated and felt it important enough to identify that Austin's friend described him as being smart but doing poorly in school, which didn't distinguish him from many other kids. Did I read that right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, were you aware that Austin in the first grade was in the Sylvan Learning Center?
No, I don't remember that.
Were you aware that he was referred to vision therapy when he was in the 4th grade?
I read his records, but I don't specifically remember that, no.
Were you aware of the fact that as early as middle school he was put on an individualized education plan through the Jeffco Public Schools?
I don't know if I read that or not.
In that individual education plan was for his testing, and apparently that extended throughout the entirety of his school career and followed him through his time at Warren Tech.
Okay.
You were aware that law enforcement interviewed Yashka Helene, a professor of his at Warren Tech?
Yes.
And she referred to that individual education plan multiple times in her recorded interview with police.
Okay, I'm not sure how that relates. So, yes, he had an IEP.
You don't mention any of those things in your reports.
No, I don't think they're relevant. He dropped out of school after 11th grade. And
well, you felt it relevant enough to put...
The witness was in mid-sentence.
Yeah. He dropped out of school in 11th grade, got his GED, and entered a community college. So he was functioning well enough to go to a community college. His friends described him as smart. I didn't go into a lot of details about his school history because I don't really know how it's relevant to his crime.
You made a comment and talked about a photograph that you were given of Jessica Ridgway outside of Stanley Lake High School.
I thought she was in a gym, but
oh, okay,
it appeared to be inside somewhere.
In a gym at Stanley Lake High School?
Yeah.
That was for cheerleading camp?
Yes.
Okay. Were you aware of when that photograph was taken?
No, she looked like it was taken within a year or so.
I'm not asking you to guess. I was just wondering if you were aware.
No, I don't know the date.
Okay. You don't know whether Austin was a student at Stanley Lake High School at the time?
No,
You don't know whether he was at the school at the time?
that's correct.
You know that law enforcement interviewed Austin for hours and hours? Excuse me.
Yes,
They seized numerous computers of his,
yes,
got terabytes of information.
yes,
Law enforcement interviewed every person they could possibly think of and uncover in terms of who knew Austin.
yes.
And there is no indication, none whatsoever, that Austin Sigg knew of Jessica Ridgway.
That's correct. We have no indication that he knew, or we have no proof that he knew Jessica Ridgway in any way.
I want to move on to some of the statements that Austin gave to law enforcement. You're aware that that was about a 6-hour interview?
Yes,
And that's not even including the part where he goes with police and they drive around the neighborhoods?
yes,
You comment in your report this morning that many of the statements made that were true in your estimation are only because he knew that law enforcement was aware of the conduct.
well, he did the things that he admitted to, not entirely, but primarily, were things that that he knew law enforcement did know or had evidence for.
Okay. And that's what you refer to as the tip of the iceberg.
Yes,
And in your estimation, in your report, you write, it seems clear to you that Austin told only the parts of the story, the parts he thought he could escape detection.
I'm
That's
sorry,
on
can you,
page 5.
page 5. Where on page 5? I don't see it. What I do say is his initial disclosure was timed such that it is reasonable to assume that he knew he was going to be caught.
If I may have a moment. Thank you. I'm sorry, if you could move to page 7. It's more of a conclusion at the end of that. Bottom paragraph, the first line.
Yes.
And if I'm reading this correctly or incorrectly, you can let me know. In short, it seems clear that Austin Sigg told only parts of the story, the parts that he could not escape detection, and made up reasons for some of his actions that do not withstand scrutiny.
Yes.
Now, looking at this 6-hour interview that Austin participated in with law enforcement, there are a number of things that Austin told law enforcement that certainly couldn't be proven by any physical evidence.
That's true. There were some things that he did admit to.
That he took the law enforcement officers on the drives that he took.
Yes.
He told law enforcement how he got into the home, how he got out of the home,
Yes.
what was said inside the home that morning, what wasn't said, emotions.
Yes.
All of those things would not be able to be proven.
That's true. He did make some statements that could not have been proven otherwise.
There were 2 detectives that were interrogating Austin over those 6 hours.
Yes.
2 detectives with 60 years of experience between the 2 of them.
Is that a question?
Were you aware of that?
Yes.
And you indicated that, in your estimation, there was extreme callousness because of the fact that he was eating during the interview. He never asked for food during that interview. He was offered food.
Yes, I'm aware that he was offered food.
He was offered water.
Yes,
Over the
I don't know, are these questions or statements?
Were you aware he was offered the food?
Yes.
Were you aware that he was offered water?
Yes.
Or Gatorade of some sort? And you're also aware that his interview with law enforcement occurred approximately 20 days following the death of Jessica Ridgway.
Yes.
Testified earlier and in your report that the crime has no characteristics of impulsivity.
Yes, that's correct.
That it's characterized by extensive planning.
Yes.
And in your estimation, he most certainly did not kill Jessica in panic to avoid detection.
No, I don't believe he did.
And you base that opinion in part on your assessment that he studied body decomposition well before this event.
Well, that's only one of the pieces, but yes, he had an interest in forensic sciences and body decompensation and so forth.
Also that he took forensic courses and was enrolled in mortuary science school.
Yes.
And in your estimation, all of those things suggest to you that this was something he was thinking about earlier in time.
Well, the mortuary science thing isn't specific planning for this event, but it was evidence that he is interested in dead bodies. He said himself that of the forensic class that he was learning how to kill people and get away with it. So I think that is more directly linked to the planning.
So once again, was that a statement attributed to Mr. Sigg during the law enforcement interview?
Yes.
And one then that you find credible?
Yes. No, wait a minute. Let me take that back. I don't believe he did say that during the law enforcement interview. I believe he said that to either Parker or his friend Laus. And they told that to law enforcement.
I want to talk a little bit about those factors that you just identified that play into your opinion. Okay, and I want to start with the study of body decomposition. Okay?
Yes.
Now you drew that information from the materials that you reviewed carefully.
Yes.
And it was a careful review of materials because when you're rendering opinions not based on testing or personal interview with an individual, you've got to look closely at the materials that you are provided.
Yes, my understanding was that he did a science project on rat body decomposition.
That was a project that was done while he was in Warren Tech.
Yes.
It was on rat decompensation.
Yes, I just said that.
Now, that project was done with a partner.
Yes.
A lab partner. And it was her idea to do that project. Were you aware of that?
No.
It was her idea to do the project, and Austin jumped on and agreed to do the project with her once his project failed. Did you know that?
I didn't know he had a project that failed. I knew he got involved in this project, yes.
That project, that I shouldn't say failed, but did not come to fruition, was actually a vision project. That was his initial project that he had planned for that component of the curriculum.
Is that a question?
Did you know that?
I think I remember some reference to a visual project, but I don't remember any details about it.
He was going to do a vision project with living patients, and he ended up helping Talia, his lab partner. Were you aware of that?
I remember something about a vision project. I didn't remember whose idea it was to do the rat decomposition. I'm aware that he had a partner.
Both his lab partner and his teacher tell law enforcement in their recorded interviews that the project was his lab partner's idea, and that he only got involved once his did not work out.
Okay.
Aware that he only took one forensic science course at Warren Tech.
Yes.
And you make some assessments about his interest in the course, but did you ever interview the teacher yourself?
I only did a records review, so I did not contact the teacher myself.
Or any of the classmates?
No, I did not personally contact any of his classmates.
Aware that his lab partner told police that Austin never said anything abnormal about serial killers or murderers?
Yes, I'm aware that the only comment that he made to anyone, to my knowledge, was when he said, I think to Parker, I'm learning how to kill people and get away with it. And I'm not aware of his commenting on that to anybody else.
So that was something you were specifically looking for, that type of comment maybe being made to folks?
No, that comment kind of jumped out.
But you didn't notice in any other record, no other interview with family, friends, classmate, or teacher, that type of comment?
No, his interests were secret. There's no question about that. He had a secret life, and he did not talk about it to other people.
You indicated that both crimes had no characteristics of impulsivity.
That's correct.
And you, I think, characterized Kentner, Lake, as Austin initially attacking an adult female who fought him off.
Yes.
Now you understand that, based on your record review, Austin drove his own Jeep to Kentner that day.
Yes.
That it was in the middle of the day.
Yes.
That it was drove to a nearby reservoir and park.
Yes.
A nearby reservoir and park that he had lived by for his entire life.
Yes.
He parked his car next to a police camera van.
Okay.
He got out of his car and started walking around the reservoir. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
He didn't hide behind anything and attack the Kentner Lake jogger.
No, but he did attack her.
He grabbed her and she pushed him down.
Yes, he tried to chloroform her.
Now, understanding she was almost immediately able to call police, and she did call police.
Yes.
Now, in terms of the events with Jessica Ridgway, again, your characterization is that the crime had no characteristics of impulsivity.
That's correct.
It's again using his own car,
Yes.
in a neighborhood that he has lived in his entire life.
Yes.
No attempt to hide the license plate or obscure the license plate when he drove away from his home that morning.
That's correct.
Parks in the residential street in daylight,
Yes.
residential street with homes.
Yes, he did all that.
Grabs a young girl in broad daylight, brings her back to his own home,
Yes.
where his mom's supposed to get back from work in just a few hours.
I'm aware of that.
You indicated that it was significant to you in this assessment of no impulsivity that he tried to hide his actions after the fact, by disposing of the backpack, for instance.
Yes.
Disposed of the backpack on a residential street.
Yes, he did.
Do you know how far that residential street was from the Sigg household?
I believe it was several miles.
He has access to a Jeep, right?
Yes.
You called him, pampered? A Jeep Cherokee? He
Yes.
could have gone much further than just a few miles to dump that backpack.
That's correct. He could have.
There was physical evidence that Austin Sigg told police about that remained in his home, even up to October 24th, 25th, when he was confessing to law enforcement.
Yes, he did keep body parts under his house.
There were also, and what I'm referring to, is, items of physical evidence that were recovered from the garage that were then later tested. He
Yes.
did not destroy the mechanism that he used for the dismemberment process.
No, I didn't say his planning was sufficient to keep him from getting caught. I didn't even say it was excellent planning, but it was planning.
In your estimation?
Well, even by his statements, I mean, he talked about trying to throw the police off. He said it himself. That was the reason that he put the backpack somewhere and the torso somewhere else. So he described planning.
15 days following the events with Jessica Ridgway, he confesses to his mother,
Yes?
confesses to his brother,
Well, his mother forces him to confess to his brother. He doesn't want to.
confesses to police.
Yes.
You indicated, based on your review of the record, yes, did you watch the recorded interview of Austin?
I watched part of it, yes.
Not all of it?
I don't think I watched the whole 6 hours, no. I mostly worked from the transcripts.
Okay. Can you tell the court approximately how many hours of the recorded interview you actually watched?
No, I don't remember.
Now let's just, difference between watching a recording and a transcript. One, the transcript could be inaccurately transcribed. The words might be different than what was actually used.
That's true. If the transcript was inaccurate, then I read an inaccurate transcript. I accepted the transcript as accurate, and I prefer to work from transcripts because I can go forward and back and see what people said at one time and what people said at another. So except for small children, I typically work with transcripts.
One thing that you can't do with transcripts is you can't see somebody's body language.
That's right.
You can't see whether or not they are expressing emotion or refraining from expressing emotion.
Which is why I watched some of the interview and didn't work entirely from transcripts.
In terms of your assessment of lack of empathy, I am referring to the transcript on page 114, 131. And I can, do you have a copy of that?
No, I don't.
You need my copy. If you want to use your copy of it also,
That would be great if I could use yours.
or you can both be working on it.
And I'm ready.
I think that's.
It's okay if I hand this to it.
He's disregarding marginal votes.
Page,
Those in the upper left corner.
yeah, I'm sorry, 141?
I think 114, isn't that
If as long as you have 131 page numbers, then that should be fine, and it's 114, that's right.
7. Okay.
And starting at the top where Austin begins to speak, following a question by Detective Lynch about why whether he felt he was going to get caught once he gave the buccal swab, Austin replies, yeah, I think so. Probably that it definitely added to it, but when it came down to it, I had really two options. Either try and get away with it, try to do whatever I could with whatever little wiggle room I had left to get away with it, or I could instead turn myself in and hopefully that nothing I could ever physically, there's nothing I could ever do in any sense of imagination or anything that could ever undo the damage I have done to the Ridgway family, to everyone who knew the little girl and everything. Detective Lynch asks, what do you think should happen to you? Personally, if I was the Ridgway family, I would want to see me executed. If I was the Ridgway family, that's just my point. I don't know what will bring the Ridgway family any kind of closure or whatever. But I just hope that whatever happens to me can give them some form of closure no matter what it is, because I'm not someone who can give that kind of closure to them. And wiping his eyes with a tissue. And hopefully this will be because. And then Detective Lynch interrupts him. Did I read that accurately?
Yes. Is there a question about it?
I may just have a moment, Your Honor.
You may.
You made a few comments about the Rorschach, excuse me, thank you, testing. And you said you had some familiarity with it when you were teaching fellow at
Yes.
Harvard. Now that was back in 1976, correct?
That's correct. I don't use it at present.
Okay. Now, earlier when I was talking with you, we talked about some medical information or medical records and some school records, and you either indicated that you didn't know some of the information that I was asking you about, or you hadn't identified it in the reports that you were given?
That's correct. Austin's mother said she had an uneventful pregnancy, and I accepted that. I didn't see any medical records that indicated otherwise.
Okay. And I'm not suggesting, to the extent that my prior questioning did, that the prosecution had access to mom's pregnancy records that weren't provided to you. But you never asked the defense for any information.
Now, I actually asked the prosecutor if I could interview Mr. Sigg, and was told that was not possible. I did accept the records that I was sent as being the total records of the case. That's what I asked for.
And you didn't ask the defense for anything other than an interview with Austin Sigg?
No, I didn't request anything. To the best of my knowledge, the records were complete.
And you didn't ask for any additional information from the prosecution?
On what topic?
You didn't notice anything that was missing?
No, I certainly didn't in the thousands of pages see anything that was missing.
And you didn't seek out any additional releases for medical or therapy information from either the prosecution or any family member?
No, so far as I knew, and so far as I know, the records were correct. I accepted that. I didn't try to redo the investigation or act as an investigator myself.
Now, one of the records that you reviewed or may have reviewed would be the records from Dr. Harl Hargett that the prosecution provided to you.
Yes.
Okay. And also the interview that law enforcement conducted with Dr. Harl
Yes.
Hargett. Now, during that interview, it was clear he wasn't relying on the full medical record, and he hadn't received the full medical record yet.
That's right.
And he was working off a memory.
Yes, he was.
And you never contacted him in order to get the complete medical record, or Austin's mother to get the complete medical record.
I'm sorry, as the court knows, they withdrew any release of medically privileged information.
She said that she didn't do any further follow-up. She didn't do any further follow-up.
And the point was that she could have asked for the release.
She did not.
Thank you.
She said that repeatedly.
Your Honor, if I may have a minute.
Please.
Now, you testified earlier that in adversarial cases where the information provided may be one-sided, you and others in your profession should not render opinions and diagnoses because you may not have all the information.
No, I didn't say blanketly you shouldn't recommend. I said there are certain kinds of adversarial situations like custody cases where most of the records consist of interviews with people who are at each other's throats, and there aren't a lot of independent records. And there are some cases where you have to be very careful not to accept you have to be very careful about making a diagnosis, for example, on a spouse based on information from an ex-spouse. But I also said in forensic cases where you have a full investigation and substantive records that we do make diagnoses at times if there is enough information in the records and particularly in the interviews.
Now, what you just said, I think to put it in a shorter way, is that you need to be more suspicious or more cautious when the sides are adversarial, right? Where it could be spouses who are...
Well, in the situation like spouses, in any court case, there's an adversarial situation. But in some cases, there is independent evidence based on police investigations. In other cases, there really isn't. And in what you have are he said, she said, and those are the cases where you have to be very careful.
And so you're telling us under oath that it's your medical opinion that only in those cases that you've just identified, you need to be careful, and in other cases, including criminal cases, you can be less careful as long as you, as a medical professional, are convinced that law enforcement did a thorough job.
Well, first of all, I'm not a medical professor, but professional. But what I am saying is that it is customary in my field, for example, in civil commitment evaluations, to make a diagnosis based on records. That's what I'm saying.
And you acknowledge that a criminal prosecution is not a non-adversarial situation, that law enforcement investigating the death of Jessica Ridgway was not a run-of-the-mill, non-adversarial situation.
Well, when I use the term adversarial, I didn't mean to say to include every criminal case in history. The courtroom itself is an adversarial situation. I was singling out certain types of situations where the records are not reliable. And psychologists do rely on police investigations. We do rely on interviews. We do rely on school records. The kinds of records I had in this case are the kinds of records that psychologists typically do rely on.
Now, you're aware this is not a civil commitment case.
Of course not.
And many of your opinions, both that you testified to earlier as well as that are contained in the report, are based exclusively on statements made by Austin Sigg.
Well, some of the opinions are based, but what I tried to do in my testimony was look at what he said and compare it with the facts of the case and the information obtained for other people. I said in the beginning I didn't rely exclusively on what Austin Rigg said. It had to match the facts of the case.
And it is Sigg. I have no further questions.
Do you have any follow-up?
Yes, three. I think three questions. You're asked to read a page of the transcript of Austin Sigg's statement to the police. Is that right?
Yes.
And at the top of that page, one could read that as expressing remorse. Is that right?
Well, that's what he was trying to indicate that he felt, yes.
In your professional experience, having interviewed over 1,000 people perhaps, is it your experience when someone says that they are experiencing an emotion, it means that they were?
No, I have learned over time that if you want to know if someone is remorseful, look at whether there were any indications of guilt, any change of behavior after the offense. Once they have been caught, it is much more difficult to ascertain if they are genuinely remorseful.
I was asking about empathy. She had made an opinion that there was no empathy. This is not following up on that question. This is a different topic outside the scope of cross-examination.
I find it's close enough to allow the question. And she's answering the next question.
Have you experienced in your career, in your the evaluations you've done, people who are able to fake or feign an emotion?
Oh, frequently. I have training tapes on offenders talking about how they were able to fake empathy.
And is there a particular class of offenders who are most skilled at faking those emotions?
Well, frankly, I find that psychopaths are most skilled at faking those emotions. And as I have said, I do not believe he would qualify as a full-blown psychopath, but he does have some of the psychological personality traits that are associated with psychopathy. And that does involve, for many people, being good at lying.
And then
I think that was your third question. You have 4.
it's now going to be a shorter one, yes. I'm going to sum it up this way. Ms. Spangler asked you a number of questions about early birth and early childhood experiences that Mr. Sigg may have experienced. Do you know if there are any correlation between those experiences and the impulse to kidnap, murder, and dismember children?
Well, certainly I've never heard of any correlation between having an IEP or having multiple abdominal surgeries or anything like that. We have millions and millions and millions of kids who get multiple surgeries, and this kind of offense is extremely rare. As to whether there could have been prenatal factors that played a role, such as paint sniffing, if there were, prenatal factors, we would expect it to show up in his behavior if there was some form of brain damage. And in fact, he was a very organized person, described by his friends as smart. He was able to function very well in society. So I'm not aware of any connection between early experiences and sadism, and if there is one, we would expect it to show up along the way.
Nothing further, thank you.
Yes, you may.
Thank you, Your Honor.
This would be recross.
Those questions related to childhood development and schooling and medical history were not suggested as a causation. They were suggested to show...
I'm sorry,
this
is a statement, not a question.
I know, but this is a precursor to your question.
They were
What was it suggested?
They were asked to show that your opinions, your testimony were uninformed without that information, and that your report is incomplete, and that you have relied on information that is not complete.
They can,
That's argument. That's not a question. That's not a question.
Do you understand that?
That's argument. That's not a question. Do you have any questions?
No.
Thank you. Anything further from this witness? No, Your Honor. Doctor, thank you very much for your attendance.
Thank you, sir.
May the doctor be excused?
Yes, sir.
You're excused. Thanks.
Your Honor, before we excuse Salter, I did want to talk to the court and the district attorney about discovery and the bills.
And about the
Oh,
bill?
sure.
That's fine.
I would-
She said that she had billed, and she said 2 prior bills, and 1 other bill.
We haven't been provided with any of that information.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to keep her here. You want her to be maintained, if you can get those bills? Are those the bills?
The DA
Your Honor,
has.
it is Dr. Salter and
It's
here. It's not Ms. Salter, it's Dr. Salter and here.
These are the bills, and if they have relevance as to her testimony, they'll be admitted without further verification of the things, right?
No.
Ma'am, you may step
Thank you.
down. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now almost 12:30. I know we still have some matters to do. Can we take, will an hour be enough? Can we resume at 1:30?
Please.
Is that agreeable to the defense? Right. We'll be in recess until 1:30. Please remain seated. Please remain seated while Mr. Sigg is removed from the court. Once he's removed, you may come out as a recess until 1:30.
All rise. Court will be in recess until 1:30.
John, test. Any feedback? Nothing? Nothing at all? This is off now. It's off now. So it's coming off this one, isn't it? It was coming off of this one. Now we're good? This isn't on at all.